In this movie, we're going to take a quick look at how to make gradients, because we haven't talked about that yet. Now, a gradient is a blend of colors. And actually, if you look at this background, you're seeing a gradient. It's a very subtle one, but you're seeing that the center is brighter and the edges, the corners, go a little darker, and they actually go a little bit towards a purple. This is actually based on a color combination that I found. I, a long time ago, bought a warehouse building that was an old construction company building, and they had this closet full of these really horrible smelling blueprints. But they had decayed and gotten this wonderful gradient color to them. So I thought, I'm going to make a background out of that. So that's why I call it plan background. Okay, our gradients are made in the color panel. And already we have this color set that we've been using. What we're going to do is make some gradients out of this. Now we have a couple types of gradients. We have radial and linear or linear. Okay, let's start with linear. And this is probably the easiest to understand, so we're going to start with this. Now, as soon as I've chosen linear gradient, you'll see that my choices have changed, and I've gotten this new little control thing down here. Now, these are our color markers. Some people call them crayons. I think that's juvenile. These are our color selectors. And what these do is they choose which color is at which point in the gradient. To change the color in the gradient, just simply double-click one of these and change and choose a color. So if I wanted to go from this kind of tan color to black, that would make it so. If I wanted to compress the space that this gradient happened over, I could move a color marker. If I wanted to put some kind of intermediary color in here, all I'd have to do is tap right underneath this bar that shows the gradient, and it will by default take the color that's right above it. If I wanted to change that color, let's change it to something horrible and hideous. Okay, now you can see I've got this bright green stuck in the middle with this tan towards the edge. I can move that in so there's more tan there, or something like that. Once I've made a gradient that I'm happy with, and I'm not happy with that at all, I want to get rid of this. Let's zoom in here. To get rid of one of these color markers, all you do is drag it straight down. Okay? Don't drag it off, because if you were to drag it off like this, that doesn't take it off. That just puts it on top of the other one. So drag it straight down and it's gone. Okay, so let's go back. We're going to put a new one here. Let's choose, how about something that's not terribly beautiful either, but I want you to be able to see them so that we can see what's going on. Okay, so this is linear. We have something called the flow. And the flow of this is what it does when the gradient ends before the shape that it fills ends. That doesn't make much sense until we see it in action. Don't want to lose this, so I'm going to go ahead and add this swatch to my swatch panel, and you can see there it is. Gradients are always going to appear at the end. Okay, so let's go ahead and fill a rectangle with a linear gradient. I've chosen the gradient already, so it automatically fills it with what's there. You can also apply a gradient with the paint bucket, and we're going to see that kind of cool and interesting thing when we do the radial. But what about this flow thing? Well, right now the gradient is covering the entire rectangle. However, you may have noticed behind your free transform tool you have a gradient transform tool. What this does is allows you to edit the way the gradient appears within the shape. Remember now, this is a merge shape that I'm working in. Okay, I've clicked on it with the gradient transform tool, and it's brought up some handles for me. Kind of hard to see. This one is the center of the gradient. So you see, if I move the center of the gradient over here, I don't get any of that black. I can also expand and contract the size of the gradient. So actually right now, the gradient is going from over here is where the black is, over here is where that pure brown is. So I'm not actually seeing all the gradient when I've got it set like this. When I come in close, I'm making the gradient occur over this short amount. Now here is where that flow control, because what we have to do is tell Flash, well, what do you want to do with these areas that are outside of the gradient? Do you want us to just keep it that same color, or do you want us to do something different? Well, right now it's set on our first setting, which you'll see is extend color. And basically that extends the color at the end of the gradient to the edge of the shape. Let's try this one. This one is going to reflect it. So watch the difference. We hit the end of the gradient, then it starts the gradient again, but backwards. So here it goes from black to tan, tan back to black, and then same thing over here. Black to tan, back. Okay, let's look at the other one. This one is reflect. Or no, repeat, sorry. Reflect was the last one. And what this does is this makes it so that it goes, it doesn't reflect it, it doesn't flip it over, it just repeats the same gradient. This one would be good if you then brought your gradient fill transform tool and flipped it around to rotate your gradient to make Venetian blinds or something like that. And then you could scale it down. This works the same with your radial gradients as well. Okay, so let's look at a radial gradient. That's kind of cool looking. I actually like that gradient now. I like it like this because, you know, you'll find that if you have an intermediate color that has some kind of cast to it, it actually gives you more depth like that. Kind of like the blue in a shadow or something like that. Okay, let's come back here. And now we're going to choose not linear, but rather radial. Radial gradient is circular. It radiates out from the center. Now this has made a radial gradient. You can see it kind of there in this little chip. I'm going to go ahead and make a swatch from this. And we're going to apply this radial gradient to our shape here. So we're going to replace the one that's there. And use the paint bucket tool for that. And it looks like so. Okay, what's going on here is that somehow, probably the last settings we used for the fill transform tool made this so it is like giant. This is a buggy behavior of Flash that has been around for a long time, and I've never seen a good explanation of why it does this. So if you don't get what you expected, zoom out and check your fill transform tool or your gradient transform tool. You can see now if I bring this in, ooh, that's cool. Like so. There you can see what the radial gradient is. Now, whenever you have a dark and a light color edge, that never looks so good because you get some aliasing there. Remember what's causing that? That's our flow. Look if we reflect it instead. I have to click again. Oops. Sorry, I have to select it with the right tool. We'll select it and change this to reflect. This is actually kind of cool. Or kind of pretty. We'll use our gradient transform tool again, and we can bring this in. To make it smaller. I grew up in the 70s, 60s and 70s, so I find it kind of cool. Though it wouldn't have been that color. Okay, let's go ahead and put this back on normal, though, which is your default for this is to just extend the color, which would give us something like that. So right now, the fill transform or gradient transform tool, I'm going to call it fill transform because that's what it used to be called a couple of versions ago. You know, Flash from the very beginning through Flash CS5, fill transform now to its gradient. We'll bring this out again. And so now all it's doing is continuing the last color. Now with this gradient selected, an interesting thing you can do is wherever you click to fill this shape with the paint bucket is going to be where the center is. And boy, I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, how about if we turn off lock? Let's try it again. There we go. what happened was I had lock fill turned on for my paint bucket, and that I think was the main cause of my problems for why it was going out like that. But if we click on the bucket, that determines where the center is. Since I was messing up with lock fill, let's look at what that does. Okay, what lock fill does is allows us to have several shapes that are all connecting gradients. I'm going to change this just to a solid color to start with. Make it smaller. I'm going to make a couple more of these. Oh, let's make some ovals too. We're going to select them all. Oh, my oval tool had a stroke on it. Oh well, it's all right. Choose our fill tool, choose our radial gradient, and we're going to then click lock instead and choose our radial gradient. And what this will do, got deselected, is every one of these that I click with the bucket with lock fill turned on, you will see that what it has done is continued that gradient across these shapes. So it's almost as if, we have to zoom out to see this. See how the gradient is like it belongs to all of these. And that's because I turned on lock fill when I filled them. I should mention that you can make your gradients egg-shaped and stuff like that as well. Okay, so that is actually this button when you are filling. If we did that with our linear gradient, it's locked those. We can then come in with our transform tool and bring it in, and you can see how a single gradient stretches across multiple shapes. And that, in a nutshell, is color gradients, or blends, some people call them.